Today at 6, heartbreak in Afghanistan as thousands beg troops at Kabul airport to allow them to board flights to freedom. Anguish and frustration for the British troops trying to keep order for frightened Afghans trying to people in South London last year.
How long have you been here waiting?
I came morning, 5 o'clock, to still I'm waiting here. In the last 3 days I'm trying to go inside.
And they won't let you into the hotel?
Yeah.
Even though the embassy has told you to come here?
Yeah, he said
Here, the Prime Minister defends his Foreign Secretary over his handling of the crisis. And Boris Johnson says he believes the situation at Kabul airport is getting slightly better. Also on the programme, an inquest jury rules the stabbing of 2 people in South London last year by a convicted terrorist could have been prevented. The pressure on ambulance services, we have a special report as the Army are called in to help.
Here I go again, my, how can I resist you?
And reinventing their lives, the new careers of the cast of Mamma Mia out of work due to the pandemic.
In Wales today, she lost her father to coronavirus. Now Anna Louise joins other bereaved families to campaign for a specific Welsh inquiry. And the long-abandoned metal mines that continue to pollute our rivers.
Sports Day, later in the hour on the BBC News channel. We'll have the latest from the 100 eliminators. Which teams will make it into tomorrow's finals?
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Amid reports of executions and torture in Afghanistan by the Taliban, thousands of people continue to mass at Kabul's airport in the hope of being airlifted out of the country. At times, British soldiers guarding the perimeter fence struggle to keep all the desperate people at bay. NATO says so far more than 18,000 have been airlifted this week amid criticism of the West's handling of the crisis. While here, the Ministry of Defence says the UK has flown out nearly 2,500 people, among them 599 British nationals, with many more who are eligible still trying to leave. Boris Johnson says latest reports suggest the situation at the airport is now improving. Well, our Afghanistan correspondent Sikunda Kamani and cameraman Malik Mudassar have sent us this report from Kabul on the despair of those still trying to escape. You may find some of the scenes distressing.
Panic and chaos close to Kabul airport. British soldiers guarding a secure compound for those being evacuated. British passport holders in the crowd desperately trying to get through. Like this Uber driver from West London.
This is the kids. We are waiting.
How long have you been here waiting?
I came morning, 5 o'clock, to still I'm waiting here. In the last 3 days I'm trying to go inside.
And they won't let you into the hotel?
Yeah.
Even though the embassy has told you to come here?
Yeah, he said
Even more distressing scenes at the main entrance to the compound. British soldiers trying to keep the crowd back. This is a scene of total and utter chaos. Many of the people here don't have any permission to board an evacuation flight, but they're so desperate that they've just turned up here anyway. That's making it extremely difficult for those who have been told to come here by the British Embassy to get through.
My family, my newborn baby.
Amongst those trapped by the crowd, this former British Army interpreter. His wife gave birth just 2 weeks ago, and he's deeply worried about the baby.
Maybe I lose my kid, and maybe she's not good. She's not good, my wife.
You can't stay here.
I can't stay here. Look at the situation. Look at the dirt all over here. And nobody, until now, I'm here since the morning. I came here, Taliban lashed me on back.
Most of the people here are in a state of total confusion. They don't know how they can, but just want to leave the country before the evacuation flights end.
What makes you think you'll be able to travel?
This woman says she was a player on the national basketball team.
I'm so scared because I'm girl. My life is danger. I'm boring. I'm what?
As the day goes on, some of those who are meant to be here eventually get through, including the family with a young baby. Many others are still struggling though. Even more who want to leave but can't will be left behind.
Secunda, just sum up the atmosphere for our viewers in the city at the moment.
Well, Clive, really distressing scenes at the airport today. So many people in such an utter state of confusion. Dozens coming up to me asking if I had any information about how they can get out, desperate to show me documents proving that they worked for international forces or foreign embassies. But elsewhere in the city, things are much calmer. It feels like a completely different world. It's very surreal. I was at a market this morning. Stalls were open as usual. Those shopkeepers were saying that there are far fewer people out and about than usual, in particular far fewer women. They said many people are still anxious and staying at home. Now, some residents here in Kabul have been reassured by the more conciliatory tone the Taliban have adopted in public, promising an amnesty for those linked to the government. We also heard these reports emerging of the Taliban targeting some Afghans. A relative of a journalist for a German outlet, DW, allegedly being shot dead by the Taliban. Amnesty International accusing the Taliban of massacring 9 members of the Hazara community last month in Ghazni province. All of this contributing to an atmosphere of deep uncertainty.
Okay, Secunda, thank you for that. Secunda Kamani there live in Kabul. Well, the Prime Minister says he has full confidence in the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, after criticism over his handling of the crisis in Afghanistan in the days leading up to the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. Mr. Raab has come under pressure for failing to call the Afghan Foreign Minister last Friday after being advised to do so by officials to discuss evacuations. The call was delegated to a junior minister but was never made. Mr. Raab now says he was prioritising dealing with security and capacity at Kabul airport. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
Arriving in a place of safety. This past week there's been a scramble to evacuate Brits and Afghans who worked with them. Planes drafted in to get people out. But could more have been done?
There he comes.
The Foreign Secretary, seen heading to Downing Street yesterday, has been under pressure.
Are you going to resign, Mr. Raab?
For not calling his Afghan counterpart last week about translators who'd helped foreign forces. Tonight the Prime Minister said
the whole of the government has been working virtually around the clock, hitting the phones to do what we can and to make sure that we get as many people back as possible.
So how did events unfold? Last Friday, Dominic Raab was advised to call the Afghan Foreign Minister. He was on holiday in Crete. He says the call was delegated to a junior minister because he was prioritising security and capacity at the airport on the direct advice of the Director and the Director General overseeing the crisis response. On Saturday, the Taliban reached the outskirts of Kabul. The Foreign Secretary was still on holiday. By now, no call was made. The government said that was down to the rapidly deteriorating situation. On Sunday, the Taliban took Kabul. The Prime Minister chaired a Cobra meeting and the Foreign Secretary flew back from holiday. The government said securing the airport was the right priority and meant more than 1,600 people have been evacuated so far, though not everyone.
It's not safe for us.
This interpreter, who we're not identifying, works with British forces. He's been told he is eligible to come to the UK, but hasn't had the paperwork, so he's hiding in Afghanistan.
Every second, I'm checking my emails because, it's not in my control. I have 4 kids and I'm thinking about my wife. I'm thinking my life is quite important for them.
With the Foreign Office under pressure, some Tory MPs have rallied round. Supporters of the Foreign Secretary have said today he is hard-working and suggested one phone call would not have made a material difference given the pace of events on the ground. But this has become a focal point for frustration, even anger, among those who question the government's readiness for and reaction to what's happened in Afghanistan.
There's been little coordination on security matters across Whitehall itself. Our foreign policy is reactive, not proactive. It's lacking confidence in its ability to lead and lacking coordination.
The Prime Minister, after meeting some of those the government has brought to safety, said the UK's effort over 20 years in Afghanistan has changed the lives of millions. Its actions now could affect the lives of many more. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Westminster.
An inquest jury has found that the stabbing of 2 people in South London last year by a convicted terrorist may have been prevented. Sudesh Aman, who was 20, was freed just days before the attacks in Streatham, and the jury concluded he could have been recalled to prison after buying items he used to make a fake suicide belt. Aman was eventually shot dead by armed police. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford.
Sudesh Aman leaving his probation hostel, a hoax suicide belt under his jacket, concealed by his bag. 35 minutes later, armed surveillance officers had to shoot him dead outside Boots.
This ain't real.
Witnesses couldn't believe their eyes as police cleared the area. Aman died before they established that the suicide belt was fake.
Police had real concerns about this attacker, both in relation to his extremist mindset and also what he may do on his release from prison. It's for this reason that they were in the right place at the right time to intervene and stop this becoming a murderous attack.
But could it have been prevented? Aman had been arrested aged 19. Images found on his computer led to him being jailed for 40 months for sharing terrorist material. But the rules at the time said he had to be released halfway through his sentence. Those rules have since changed for terrorism offenders because of his case. In Belmarsh prison, if anything, he became more radical, mixing with Hashim Abedi, the Manchester bomber's brother, Ahmed Hassan, the failed Parsons Green bomber, and Abdullah Ahmed Ali, who led a plot to blow up planes with liquid explosives. The prison's intelligence system recorded that Aman, known as Faraz, wanted to kill the Queen, become a suicide bomber, and join ISIS. A pledge of allegiance to the leader of the Islamic State group was found in his cell. A senior counter-terrorism officer wrote to the prison governor asking if he could delay Aman's release, but he couldn't. So once released, he was followed everywhere by armed surveillance officers. They watched as he bought aluminium foil, parcel tape and drinks bottles, items they knew could be used to make a fake suicide belt, just like the one he was wearing on the day of the attack. The jury said an opportunity to prevent the attack was missed that night, as he could have been recalled to prison because his risk to the public had changed. On the day of the attack, Aman was being tracked through South London by a 9-man team of armed surveillance officers.
When he went into the low-price store here on Streatham High Road, an officer being called BX87 to protect his identity was only a few metres behind.
Aman stole a knife and ran out of the shop, stabbing but not killing 2 people as he ran along, chased by a pair of surveillance officers, their guns drawn. When Aman turned on them, they feared for their lives and opened fire. The jury concluded it was a lawful killing. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Streatham.
Northern Ireland has recorded its highest daily number of positive coronavirus tests since the start of the pandemic. As more people get vaccinated, data from the Stormont Department of Health shows 2,397 people tested positive in the latest 24-hour period. Previously, the highest daily number was 2,143, recorded last December. 4 out of 10 ambulance trusts in England have confirmed they're receiving help from the Army to deal with rising demand this summer. The coronavirus pandemic has stretched resources, already under pressure due to record call-outs. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Loud and clear. How can you hear me, Eva?
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, strength 5 loud and clear, Eva.
Darren is a paramedic manager, about to go out on the road in South Oxfordshire. Usually he only gets involved in major incidents, but call volumes are so high that he's helping out with day-to-day cases.
We've come through an exceptionally busy time with the pandemic. A lot of the staff have obviously felt the pressure of that through the months, but they're continuing to go above and beyond. Reports of a female in the River Thames in Abingdon.
He gets to the scene to find the woman has been pulled from the river by passers-by and is being treated by ambulance service colleagues.
Patient is conscious and breathing.
A call-out takes him to check on an injury in a town centre, another example of the demands on the service at this time of year.
Where are we here?
With more people out and about, July and August can be very busy for ambulance services. But staff say it's even busier now than it was in the summer before the pandemic, with a range of health challenges across local communities adding to COVID pressures. The message to the public: if it's not an emergency, use 111 online if possible.
Currently within South Central Ambulance Service we're at extreme pressure. We're a really busy service at the moment and we're making sure we're doing our best to serve our patients and our community. We've got staff that are off sick, we've got staff that are unable to attend work due to track and trace and other reasons.
The South Central Service is using 10 military personnel to help support staff with the intense workload, and others in the northeast of England, where 25 MOD staff are being trained before being deployed. 2 other services in England are also getting military support. NHS England said these were tried and tested measures in periods of exceptionally high demand, but unions say it all raises questions.
Well, the short-term measures indicate that all isn't well, and topping up using short-term fixes like military aid, like private ambulances, are an indication that we need to have a rethink about how many people we actually need working in the service.
Northern Ireland's ambulance service says there's no use of military staff, but there is support from crews from the Republic. The MOD is also not involved in Scotland and Wales, but around the UK, significant pressures are reported because of a range of patient needs. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 37,314 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 31,336 new cases per day in the last week. 6,441 people are currently in hospital with the virus. 114 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 98 deaths a day in the past week. On vaccinations, 87.4% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab and 76% have had 2 jabs. Well, our health editor Hugh Pym is with me now. We saw an example of the pressures on the NHS in that report on ambulance services, but there's also some news today on the impact of large-scale events on infection rates.
Yes, Clive, officials have been monitoring 37 trial events over 4 months, like the British Grand Prix and Wimbledon, and other sporting events and theatre and music, and they've reached their conclusions today, which are that any increase in cases or transmission of the virus associated with these events is entirely in line with what was happening anyway in local communities. Therefore, the conclusion is it is safe to hold these events. But there is a warning that people do need to follow the guidelines when they go to indoor settings and what they call pinch points around big venues like travel and getting to big sporting events, and also the vital need to get vaccinated. And one interesting further conclusion is health officials in England say the worst spikes in infections linked to the final stages of the Euros, with big football crowds watching England. But they say those are not typical of the sort of regular sporting events that they've been following.
Sure. OK, Hugh, many thanks. Hugh Pym there. It is 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. There's heartbreak in Afghanistan as thousands beg troops at Kabul airport to allow them to board flights to freedom.
And still to come, we're live in Edinburgh, where the SNP and Scottish Greens agreed to work together in an historic deal which takes the Greens into government for the first time anywhere in the UK.
Coming up on Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on BBC News, we've reached the halfway stage at the Women's Open, and Georgia Hall is well placed heading into the weekend at Carnoustie.
Nearly a week after a powerful earthquake hit Haiti, there are still some remote areas that haven't received any aid. More than 2,000 people have died, with the epicenter of the quake in the southwest of the country. At least 12,200 others were injured and several hundred are still missing, while an estimated 135,000 families have been displaced. Our correspondent James Clayton reports now from the small town of Les Anglais, where an entire parish is in mourning.
To get to the small town of Les Anglais, you have to take the coastal road. The town is 2 hours from Le Caille, and the road snakes through earthquake-scarred villages and even through a river. This is what's left of the town's church. A mass christening was about to begin just before the earthquake struck. The church had been filling up with people. Dafika had woken up excited. Her daughter was one of the dozens of children to be christened that day.
The church already had a lot of people inside, so I was looking for a good place to sit. I put my bag down, and just as I was about to sit down, the earthquake struck. Everyone started running, but each side of the church was full of people. I was holding my baby. I tried to get out of the front. I was so nearly out, and that's when it collapsed on me.
Dafika suffered injuries to her head, back and legs, but survived. Her daughter, Esther, died in her arms.
We were inseparable. When we went to the church, we were two, but I came back alone. I will never forget her.
This is a town still in mourning. 22 people died here in the collapse, including many children. Auxil shows us belongings laid out in the cemetery across the street, including a christening veil, as yet uncollected. Sometimes I ask myself, does God exist, he says. It's too much. It's too much.
Nearly a week after this earthquake, and the true scale of the devastation is still revealing itself. And that's why it's feared that the death toll here could rise further.
Some help has started to arrive here, desperately needed food and clothes. But this earthquake has turned communities upside down. Trauma that may never heal. James Clayton, BBC News, Les Anglais.
The SNP and the Scottish Greens have agreed to work together in a formal partnership at Holyrood, putting the Greens into power for the first time anywhere in the UK. The deal gives the Scottish Government a majority to pass legislation, including a new independence referendum bill. But the agreement isn't a formal coalition, as our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon explains.
On the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, the Fringe is in full swing. Crowds are back, performers putting on shows.
Hurry up, Paul! Hurry up!
The big political show in town today, the deal between the governing SNP and the Scottish Greens. Their co-leaders arriving, smiling, as they take the Greens into government for the first time anywhere in the UK. This an agreement built on cooperation and consensus, according to Scotland's First Minister, and one which she said gives momentum to calls for another referendum.
I am determined that there will be an independence referendum in this Parliament. I said in the election this agreement reiterates that. It's not about making it more likely. I think it makes it harder and indeed impossible on any democratic basis for a UK government to resist the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future.
While united on wanting to see Scotland become independent, neither the SNP or Scottish Greens are hiding that there are policy areas where they are split.
We agree on some things, disagree on others, and those distinctive voices can and will remain. That's why this isn't a coalition in the traditional sense, but that mustn't mean that we can't cooperate for the good of the people of Scotland, our climate and our environment.
As well as committing to another independence referendum, this power-sharing deal also details increased investment in public transport, more money towards energy efficiency and renewable heating, as well as more support for offshore wind and marine renewables. But there are areas where the two parties agree to disagree. These include aviation policy, using GDP as a measure of the economy, and while agreeing to work together on education reform, private schools are also excluded from this agreement.
I just think it is a coalition of chaos that will put jobs, the economy and our recovery at risk as they obsess over another independence referendum rather than the important issues for people right across Scotland.
In their fourth term of government at Holyrood, the deal offers the SNP administration more stability. For the Greens, it's a chance to shift the dial on their core issues. It still needs approval from the decision-making bodies in both parties. That's expected in the coming days. Well, to be clear, there are already a majority of MSPs at the Scottish Parliament who are in favour of independence. But if this deal does get the go-ahead, while it's not a formal coalition, it will mean that the Scottish Government now also has a majority in favour of independence. And a source close to the First Minister here at Bute House told me earlier today that they really think that does shift the dial, give added legitimacy to their arguments for another referendum. Clive.
OK, Lorna, thank you. Lorna Gordon there in Edinburgh. While official figures show there are more job vacancies across the UK, long-term youth unemployment is actually at a 5-year high. More than 200,000 under-25s have been out of work for more than 6 months. There has also been a significant rise in people moving back into full-time education and away from the world of work. Sarah Corker has been speaking to some young people about how they see their jobs and career prospects now that many COVID restrictions have eased.
Go careful. Everyone's going for the same jobs. It's difficult.
If you do really want work, there's work out there now.
It took me around 9 months from starting to then getting a job.
History shows that when there's an economic shock, it's young people whose incomes and career prospects are often hardest hit.
Mummy.
When I met Megan and Dan a year ago in Hull, both were out of work. They were skipping meals so their 3 children didn't go without.
I'll do anything, you know what I mean, because at the end of the day we need that money to live.
We've had to get food parcels off them numerous times.
It's been a tough 12 months, but things have improved. Dan is training to become a security guard.
My work coach helped me through it a lot, and he was basically saying that there's this, and he was saying, like, just keep applying.
Megan is still looking for work.
I just apply for anything that's available. If I see it, I'll apply for it, even if it's not the ideal job that I want to do. At least it's something.
There are positive signs. Unemployment is falling, but not everyone's feeling that recovery. Long-term youth unemployment is at a 5-year high. More than 200,000 under-25s have been out of work for 6 months or more. When I first spoke to David last year, despite having 2 master's degrees, he'd been rejected from more than 100 jobs.
You're out of control of your own life by that point as to where's the money going to come.
In the end, he left Hull and moved to Manchester for more opportunities. He's now working for an organisation supporting disabled people.
If you are the type of person that's applied for a lot of jobs, like, well, anybody has at the minute, I suppose, and you don't get those responses, it can really hurt. So I do count myself lucky that I've ended up in this position.
Youth workers worry that those in poorer areas are at risk of being left behind.
That knock-on effect for young people is absolutely huge. We've seen a lot of people that have really struggled. There's been a lot of opportunities missed in education shutting down. A lot of people might not even have the basic needs like heating and food, so internet and computer access and printers and scanners isn't really a priority.
Despite the challenges, there are now more job vacancies.
I'm very confident things are looking up.
And while it may take longer for their careers to recover from the pandemic, there is optimism for better times ahead. Sarah Corker, BBC News in Hull.
The children's author and illustrator Jill Murphy has died at the age of 72. She was suffering from cancer. She created the Worst Witch books, which have twice been adapted for children's television. And she was also known for her picture books, including the Large Family series about a community of elephants. Today, she's been praised for her unparalleled talent for storytelling through words and pictures. Jill Murphy, who's died at the age of 72. The coronavirus pandemic resulted in lockdowns that deprived millions of people of paid work. While some benefited from the government's furlough scheme, others had to find alternative employment to get by. Our correspondent David Sillito has been speaking to one group of people who found themselves facing an unexpected career change, the cast of the West End musical Mamma Mia.
It always begins with an overture. A little musical welcome from 93-year-old David Dennis to his daily carer, Stephen Beckett.
Hey David. Hello. How are you doing?
I saw a sign. A care agency was looking for staff.
I thought I want to contribute. I want to do something. I can't just sit around.
Here I go again, my, how can I resist you?
People at the care agency, they all gave me 5 minutes.
It is a bit of a change from what Stephen was doing just over a year and a half ago, performing in London's West End as one of the 3 dads in Mamma Mia. And Stephen's co-stars? Richard Trinder has been painting and decorating, and dad number 3 has been out on the road.
My name is Neil, this is Gilbert. I normally play Harry in the West End version of Mamma Mia, but now I'm delivering parcels. I'm only doing this for something to do as well. I mean, you know, you need to pay the bills and things, but to get out of the house, that was the main thing. Lockdown is tough. I mean, I'm on my own, I'm not interacting with people, I'm just, you know, delivering parcels, I'm getting out each day.
Guys, here it comes. Best thing would be don't forget to smile.
When the theatre closed in March of last year, much of the cast thought they'd be back here in a few weeks, a few months at most. 16 months later, they're finally back in the theatre and reflecting back on, like millions of us, a year in which life was completely transformed.
Here we go again.
And it also means it's been farewell to Mr. Dennis
Yes, I was broken hearted.
and Stephen's unexpected pandemic career.
How are you going to look back on this year? I'm going to look back on it with gratitude. You know, a lot of people in lockdown, especially in that first wave of lockdown, we were the only people that our clients saw for weeks and weeks, sometimes months on end.
This is the last day. Are you going to miss him?
Yes, but he's got my number and I think I got his somewhere, so we can keep in touch anyway. He's a good fellow.
It's what keeps us going. Care, music, friendship. David Sillito, BBC News, Brighton.
Now, time for a look at the weather. Here's Chris Fawkes. Hi, Chris.
Hi Clive, it's been another cloudy day for most of us, but just like yesterday there have been a few tears in the cloud sheets that allowed a bit of sunshine to come through. Sunny spells there in Inverness earlier, but today's weather has been brought to you courtesy of this low pressure just to the west. This thicker cloud is a weather front that's just beginning to work into western areas, bringing with it some rain, but the rain has been coming along in pulses, and that's really the way of things overnight tonight. The rain pushes northwards and eastwards. At times it'll be quite heavy and then it will tend to ease off and become a bit more drizzly, not really making its mind up what it's going to quite do. There's going to be some murky weather as well as the rain, some mist and fog patches around our coast and hills, so quite murky conditions for some. And a mild night, temperatures 16 degrees for your low in Liverpool and in Hull as well. Now, tomorrow it's not the most promising starts to the weekend. We've got this rain around, probably at its heaviest across Wales, northern England, maybe the Midlands as well, eventually reaching East Anglia and the southeast, but at the same time, it'll brighten up across Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England with a mixture of sunshine and a few heavy showers following in. Generally, temperatures a bit disappointing, mostly into just the high teens, but Sunday looks like being the better of the 2 days of the weekend. Cloud will begin to break up and there'll be some sunshine coming through. Stays dry as well for Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England, perhaps parts of western Scotland too. Central and eastern Scotland, central and eastern England will though see some showers, and those showers could be quite heavy as we head into the afternoon. Temperatures coming up into the low 20s. A big change in the weather pattern though into next week as this high pressure starts to develop. We get our winds coming in from Scandinavia, so no heat wave on the way. The hot air stays further south around the Mediterranean and southern Europe, but nevertheless next week a lot of dry weather, a lot of sunshine and temperatures coming back into the low 20s, and in that August sunshine that will feel quite nicely warm. Clive.
About time, mate. Thanks, Chris. That's it. So goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good evening.